All right, let's do it. All right. All right, we're starting this webinar. My name is Hani Shanib. I am the president of the National Council on U.S.-Libya Relations. I have with me today quite an impressive panel of Libyanists and those who are engaged on the Libyan subject. Our panel today will be discussing a very, very important and timely subject, and that is what is happening with the political process that has been initiated by the United Nations in regards to Libya, and trying to salvage whatever can be salvaged from a situation that has kind of dragged on for 10 years in Libya. Total chaos, despair in the streets of Libya, a country that is at the verge of collapse. It is not actually collapsing. A war that was a bizarre war that was carried on for almost a whole year, and is now kind of sort of smothering and is really at a phase where nobody is understanding in what direction it's going to be going. The partners in Libya are looking at disengagement, military resolution, and there is what they call the successful 5+5 that is now called the 10. Is it really a secure, guaranteed agreement? Is it much ado about nothing? As we hear, there is tension in the air. There is a political process that is going on, initiated and started in Tunis. 75 invitees were brought in to try and make some sense out of the political chaos that exists in Libya. It is basically coming in at a time where the Khayrat agreement has basically pretty much come to a complete halt. Is this going to be a Khayrat number 2? Will it produce something that would be beneficial to the Libyans who are not only struggling economically and socially, but basically torn apart between cities? They can't travel between them. They cannot execute any reasonable activity, whether economic or social or other. COVID is ravaging the population without any preparation, without any healthcare facilities that are capable of dealing with this horrific pandemic that has hit them. We are really very curious about where that political process is, and we have assembled a group of experts here today. I will introduce the panelists as they come in, but it is suffice to say that we are today privileged to have this group of panelists. Mohammed Jarrah, who just came in, Ahlan bik. Mohammed, what I'd like to do really is to basically introduce our speakers as they come in, rather than introduce them all at the beginning. Our first participant that I would like to ask questions is one of the active participants in the political process itself. She is one of the members of the dialogue in Tunisia and now through Zoom. Zahra Langi. Zahra Langi is the head of the Women Platform for Peace, a quiet political activist, very well respected. She is today based in Cairo, and I would like to start by her. Zahra, you have been there at the beginning. You've seen the political process as it started from day one. You have made a position today that is quite interesting and different and defiant. Why don't you start, Zahra, by giving us a little bit of brief of from day one, when you received an invitation, what was going on in your mind, and thereafter, as you started being involved in the political process, can you give us kind of a step-by-step or day-by-day how the events went on and where are they today? Zahra.
Well, yes, thank you, Dr. Hani. I'm happy to be with you all. This is, I don't think I do have the time to go through all of the questions, but to give like snapshots of the political dialogue. In fact, I participated in political dialogues in Libya since 2013. And I take a special interest in how each political process is designed. And as I have been outlining before in my writings, criticizing the design of political processes, I see them centered around the idea of power sharing among political elite, rather being people-centered. And you just started with the challenges that Libyans face today, especially in the wake of the pandemic. And we actually started this time in a preparatory session, which was on Zoom before convening physically, on a subject that was called health diplomacy. However, I do think that we still tend to do things in silos. That preparatory session did not have any reflection on the what has been discussed and how we are discussing things, how to bring stabilization in Libya. So I actually would like to always to just to structure my talk as in it's good to for those who do not have a full vision of the Libyan political dialogue forum, I would always say it's address the who question, what and how. And as I've been outlining even before the last Tunis session, that these three questions are interrelated and all matters. Because we've heard from the acting special envoy, Stephanie Williams, that it doesn't matter the who question. What matters is what will come out from this meeting, meaning the roadmap and a final date on the elections. However, I do understand the concerns that Libyans have on the who question, on the criteria of representation, who is represented on the table, on what criteria, who do they represent, and who picks them. So I think this is a very legitimate question, and it is related to all the other questions. When we come to the what, I think what, and I think I should actually commend you for the title of today's webinar. Is it a breakthrough or a breakdown? And I actually think that in order to have a breakthrough in Libya, we need to break down certain things, and that is basically the culture of rentierism, centralization, totalitarianism, and the state of institutional anarchy that Libya lives in today. And that is only possible to achieve through having a national charter. And I was hoping that this time we have learned the lessons that we failed in back 2013 during the Tariq Mitri time, where we were only focused on how to balance the powers between the government, the executive powers, the government basically, and the GNC. Though there was this problem of the blocking oil in the east and the federalist sentiments and grievances, it was never on the table. Also, there was this problem of Amazigh and Tabu boycotting the constitutional process. It was not addressed on the table. So what was addressed is only power sharing. And we know that that process failed. then we had the elections, and then we had a failed transfer of power, and then we had the Lyon, the Sakhairat that was led by Lyon, and we know, all of us today know where we are, and we know that we failed miserably there. So this time we have a process, a Berlin process, that is stemming from the LPA, but the premise is that we want to deal with the gaps and amend the gaps. So I'm not sure that what we have done, at least in the past week, we were able to do that. I think the question of the pressure of time is pressuring some in the international community that we need a quick fix. We definitely need to stop the bleeding of in blood, in finance, in money, in corruption, but you cannot do that with a rigged process, because the outcome would be definitely flawed. And that's why the question of how really matters. How we design the process. We all know, we hear that there's a meeting today and yesterday in Tangier between the HOR, and they say this is a consultative meeting. On the 6th of December, there's the track of the constitutional track. And so the relationship between the tracks is not clear. And yes, I am for the idea of a multi-trackism, but in order not to have a multi-trackism only as a buzzword, we need to define exactly what tracks and on what basis are we having these tracks. Because the whole idea is to have an inclusive process and not just to appease regional actors and adding more to the confusion and making it more of an ad hoc process. So I think
Zahra, So Zahra, you're giving a sort of a holistic overview of the political process and a sort of a historical perspective and where it is right now. But many of our audience really do not still understand what was the purpose of the Tunisia meeting. You alluded to the fact that there were 75 people that were invited, and there was a question about how they were invited and who do they represent. But then the purpose, it seems, been consolidated into trying to get a quick fix for what? Is it about making a decision regarding an executive body that can temporarily run the country? And what's wrong with this? What's wrong with trying to get a sort of a practical executive that can run the country even for 18 months? It seems like a reasonable thing to do in the absence of a credible government that took a little bit longer to actually get to recognize that it wasn't really that functional. So can you comment on this very quickly? Yes.
Idea is to the Berlin process is basically divided into three tracks. This is the political track. We know there's an economic track, military track, and this is the political track. And the political track basic goal was to set a roadmap to end the transitional phase, and in order to do so, we need to unify the executive body. And that's why, but it should not be reduced into establishing a new body. So there was this debate, of course.
So the body that you're talking about is the 75 people that have been...
No. I'm not talking about the 75. I'm talking about
what is the new body you're talking about?
The executive body.
Oh, the executive. But to create the executive, you had to create a new body to choose that executive. So now you have a de novo entity, which is 75 that are the responsible entity for the choice of this executive.
That's the other. No, if I can clarify the whole idea. So I will come to the 75. What's the role? And one of the problems is that there is no clear mandate of the role of the 75. There's this idea of constructive ambiguity, which we know that was never constructive at all. And the whole idea of having a role for a political dialogue that will be consultative, that will be, some will argue that it's legislative, that will monitor the performance of the government, was there even in the LPA in the earlier drafts. However, because I was part of the process, so I know how what was there in the institutions. So that was, and maybe what we will see, that there will be no significant role later on in the so-called preparatory period for this LPDF. So it's
without interrupting you again, Zahra, there seems to be, you brought in the ambiguity issue, and as a sort of an observer from the outside, the ambiguity is premised on the fact that they are required by the mandate given to them to address constitutional issues, legislative issues, and executive issues in addition to administrative issues. So all of a sudden you have like
not really. It is. I understand those who argue so, and that's a part of the ambiguity that I am talking about. There is no clear mandate, and I think when you don't have a clear mandate, it's even worse, because you actually feed in the already existing state of institutional anarchy that we're having here in Libya today. So yes, there is a role, a constitutional role for the LPDF, if the two bodies, the House of Representatives and the State Council, fail to do something within this period of. So there is, you can say, a constitutional role. There is also a mention of a role that they will be monitoring the performance of the government. Yes. When you say legislative, I'm not sure what you're referring to, because there is no legislative role in that sense. But even so, these two makes, especially when you lack a clear mandate and you lack a legal terms of reference, legal regulations for how to deal with conflict of interest, how to deal with confidentiality, how to deal with issues of corruption as we see today. I think part of the things, and that's why I say the what question I was stressing even before in other panels is important. So before creating any institution that will play a role in Libya, or at least will establish and unify institutions that will play the major role in Libya, we need to organize the house first. And that's why I have abstained from today's meeting, because I think the question of transparency and accountability within this body is important.
We will get back to this, Zahra. This is a very important thing, and the whole issue of transparency and some of the events that have occurred around the meeting, particularly with the attempt to bribe and so on, is a key issue. But we will address this in a minute. Mohammed Ijara, I want you to jump on this and just give me what you think about what the tasks that are given to the 75 participants mean, and expectations of outcome, and what is the strength and weakness in all this? I want your opinion on that one.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hani. Glad to be with all of you. On the very specific question that you asked regarding the role of the 75, or the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum now as it is known, I tend to disagree with Zahra a little bit. And again, this is because of the constructive ambiguity that people, because now we start to look at what this means or how we read it and so on. And this is really an issue. I actually think the roadmap that has been put together, the 75 actually have an executive role. They have a legislative role. They have an oversight role as well, riqabi, dawr riqabi. And they have actually a constitutional role as well. So they actually play all of these roles. At least this is the way I read it in that sense. But let's go to the source of the problem. Why is this being considered anyway? This is being considered because we had hijacked institutions that have been controlled either by an individual like Aguila Saleh in eastern Libya, who prevented the LBA from being adopted and enshrined in the constitutional declaration back in 2016, and also because of the State Council and the fact that it is actually hijacked by a certain political current in Libya. And these two institutions since 2016 have failed to come together to implement the very agreement that their delegates signed in Skhirat back in December 2015. And what people who are critical of the role of these institutions are saying is that we cannot let them do whatever they want to do. They cannot hold the country hostage, and we cannot allow them to play the same game again. So the idea of institutionalizing the LPDF and creating that body so that it plays the role of these institutions in case they fail. So actually, the roadmap says that the HOR has a role, it should play that role, but if it fails to play that role, then it has to be referred back to the LPDF. We would need to agree on the constitutional basis and so on. And if it fails, then it has to be referred again. The government has to facilitate elections and so on. And if it does not, it's not able to do that by the 24th of December 2015, then the issue would have to be then again referred to the Libyan political dialogue. And they do have a monitoring role in that sense. And that is where the idea of giving the LPDF these powers came from. My concern is the following. I definitely am concerned about these hijacked institutions, hijacking the transition to an election and change of power or the transition that we all seek. But I am also worried about the idea of completely dismantling the concept of institutions in Libya. In 2014, we decided to cancel political parties, and individuals could only run as individuals in elections. And we are suffering as a result because of that. Even within the political dialogue now, today, I think it would have been better to have blocks or to have political currents that are actually pushing for candidates or programs or pushing for ideas. Instead, what we had is that individuals with very individual, sometimes perspectives and ideas, and that has led us to the whole episode of bribes and corruption and so on. So it's a matter of trying to find that balance, I guess. It's very important that we think very carefully about the concept, the very concept of institutions, and how we preserve that concept through this process. But also at the same time, we should not allow these institutions and individuals within these institutions to any way attack the concept of institutions from within, like Aguila Saleh did, or like Mashri did, or like Swahili did. And these are my views on this very specific question, Azizi.
Thank you, Muhammad. Muhammad is the co-founder of the Libya Outlook Research and Consultancy, and he is really a talented analyst of everything that has been occurring in Libya for the last 10 years. Sought after for his opinion, and I appreciate what you just have said. Now we're going to get back to you, but I want to bring in Mohammed Al-Dari, who is the former foreign minister of Libya earlier on in the initial two governments that were in Libya. Mohammed, Your Excellency, could you tell us what your thoughts are about exactly the same subject that we are in, and what do you think the prospect of success of this is, success or failure in it? There's certainly, Libya needs a fix, and just keeping it in the status quo is unattainable. You have to find something. You have to get out of all this, and with all the risks that are associated. Staying in the way we are right now is just a recipe for disaster. But is this the right way to go? Is the political process that is happening right now a sort of has the potential for succeeding, or are we repeating the Skhirat agreement again? Mohammed, please.
I would like to build on what Mohammed Al-Jar has just said. Indeed, the two legislative bodies that we have had in Libya since 2014 have failed particularly and vividly in 2017 when Dr. Ghassan Salamat, the former special representative, gathered with both of them for 2 months between September and October 2017. We had a subsequent meeting between Aguila Saleh and Khalid al-Mishri in Morocco in April 2018. And as yet, we have not seen Libyans coming forward to bring about a political solution to the otherwise complex Libyan issue that we are grappling with. I think what the Berlin process has produced is to give a further increased role for the UN. And I think the international community has so far supported what UNSMIL has been trying to do. And not least because of the today statements of four European nations, France, Italy, Germany, and the UK, have come forward to support what Stephanie Williams has been doing, and have pledged their support behind Stephanie Williams and the current proceedings of the political forum, which it has been held in Tunis and today virtually by Stephanie Williams and her team. I would like to say that unfortunately, there is no, as you said rightly, we have had a catastrophic and situation in Libya. But I think Stephanie Williams and the UN, the international community behind, have no option but to succeed, to indeed have the bare minimum of a yet fifth transitional period that will be unfolding. I think Stephanie Williams and the international community, which has come forward today, not to mention the US, which has seen its ambassador to Libya touring many capitals this summer between Cairo, Ankara, Moscow, Paris, and even Malta. All of these nations are looking forward to UNSMIL and to see some achievements before the new special representative comes into play and being appointed in the first place and come forward to play his.
Let me interject, since you brought in the powers to be on the outside, France, UK, Germany, and so on, and the repetitive statements of we support. I've heard that with Martin Leon. I've heard that over the last many years. Is the environment on the ground conducive to a success of a political process? And by that I mean that there are still, a very strong rebellious entities that are all over the country imposing their will. Today we've heard that some militias went into the national oil companies' offices in Tripoli. There is even the holder of the gavel. I'm sorry. Yeah, there is in Germany, for example, the holder of the gavel for the Berlin meeting and so on. They were not able to actually get into a ship that was loaded with arms that was coming in towards Libya and search it. It was denied that by Turkey. So what are we talking about? Is it just the repetitive of statements that we support and so on? Are we in an environment that would allow the success of this? And I'm going to just shift very quickly on the security issue, because that is basically the essence of any success in the future of any political understanding or agreement, or even a temporary entity that will rule the country in the next 16 months or so on. Wolfgang, can you tell me, please, a little bit about the things that are happening on a day-to-day basis from a security point of view? What is the meaning of the 5+5? Is it a 5+5 equals 10? Is it 5+5 equals 0 at this point? Are we at a verge of another confrontation? Why is it that the Europeans have failed to even guard the Mediterranean from weapons and so on that are coming in there?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The 5+5 refers to the number of representatives in the military discussions, in the military track. Actually, there are 5 representatives appointed by the GNA, and the chair of them is the head of the office, is the former military governor of Sirte, so a rather unimportant function, whereas the head of the Libyan National Army delegation is quite high ranking, and they include also the head of the office of the command of the Libyan National Army. So there is an imbalance within the 2 delegations. One is a quite important one with quite significant representatives, where the other one has a quite difficult role to fulfill within the framework of the GNA. The only one real success for the time being within this 5+5 military track is the ceasefire. Is the ceasefire, or let's say, is the signing of the ceasefire. Because actually on the ground there was already a ceasefire since about the end of June. There were only some minor skirmishes and 2 or 3 attempts by Operation Volcano forces to occupy the Al-Jufra oasis, which failed. But now the ceasefire, which was signed on October 23, should have brought a real progress. And I want to really stress, should have brought. Actually, next to nothing other than there is a ceasefire from the document which was signed in Geneva was implemented. The military units did not yet return to their camps. The mercenaries and foreign fighters did not withdraw from Libya. Actually, it's not even clear who is a foreign fighter. Is this only referring to the Sudanese and Chadi, or also to the Russians? What about the Turkish? The LNA insists that they also need to go. The GNA argues, no, they are there because of a military memorandum of understanding. There was an agreement that all military training by foreigners in Libya needs to be suspended. That's not the case. Just last Saturday, the first batch of infantry trained by Turkish military in the Jura graduated. They are conducting air defense and tank training, by the way, training on American tanks provided by the Turks in Misrata. So altogether, the only one thing which was really implemented is the ceasefire. With regard to everything else, there is next to nil success or next to nil progress. Not even the roads between the East and the West were opened. Somehow a minor success is that they have met for the first time in Libya. The first meeting was in Gadames and the second meeting was in Sirte. But the real significant progress is still to be made.
Well, thank you. Can you make a quick comment about the incident of the Germans unable to search the ship that was coming in this morning, and what are the implications of this?
Actually, today, a Turkish freighter was stopped by the German Navy, and at first there was some information that the ship was not being searched by the Germans, but as it turned out, they boarded the ship and they searched the ship. I don't know yet if there was anything found on the ship which was like weapons or ammunition or something like this. But it's for sure that the Turkish government has protested against this. But nevertheless, this is well within the mandate of Operation Irini. It needs to be seen if there were really weapons on board of the ship, and if these weapons are to be confiscated by the Germans or better by the European Union.
So in your opinion, there is still volatility and uncertainty about how that military agreement or the 5+5 is heading, and that could could change any minute. Am I correct?
Exactly. As long as there is no international real monitoring of the ceasefire, and such a monitoring would need not only the agreement of the Libyans, but also a UN mandate, we can expect an outbreak of violence, let's say in the midterm. What is of particular interest is that there are 3 different ways to monitor this ceasefire. The first one is, and this is under discussion, to have some kind of observer force, either a civilian one or a lightly armed military observer force, maybe even with some reconnaissance assets, or to deploy a peacekeeping force, maybe at first by the European Union, some kind of rapid reaction force to be replaced by a UN force. But the third option, which is being discussed between Turkey and Russia, is probably the one which would have most impact on the country. They are discussing some kind of Idlib-style military agreement, so that on one side, Turkey would patrol the ceasefire line, and on the other side, the Russians. I'm not sure if this would do any good to the region and also not to Libya.
Thank you, Wolfgang. Wolfgang is the security and policy analyst, was for several years the defense attaché in Libya for the government of Austria, and he is the chairman of the advisory board of the National Council on U.S.-Libya Relations. Thank you for your insight, Wolfgang. I would like to bring in Jason Pack. Jason, you always have a lot of, very good opinion about what is happening in Libya, the trends, and do you really think, based on your analysis of the last few years and up to today, are we moving in the right direction, or are we about to repeat the same mistakes that have happened in the last few years? Jason. Unmute, please. Unmute. Please unmute. Yeah.
Thanks for that kind introduction, Hani. And sadly, you asked a very wise leading question. I do think the same mistakes are being repeated. And if we weave together what Zahra, Mohammed, and Wolfgang have said, we can tease it out. I agree with Zahra's analysis of what has happened in the past and the failings, but not so much her read on the legal complexities happening now. I think that Mohammed nailed that, which is that yet again, we're seeing a group of individuals invited to solve a problem where they are not representative of the people who have power on the ground. And that's exactly what happened in Skhirat. So then to connect that to what Wolfgang said, to some extent, the 5+5 is the most successful of the dialogue tracks, because people who are being represented there have some loose connections to the stakeholders on the ground. However, they're not really the stakeholders on the ground either. They have a tenuous connection at best. And as you pointed out, 5+5 is either equaling 10 or equaling 0, but it's supposed to equal 1. That's the magic here. It's like a Christian Trinity, 5+5 is supposed to equal 1, because if you can't unite into some real armed forces and then have a DDR process, you've accomplished nothing. What I'd like to build on to answer your question is where we are from a military perspective and why there really is a lot of opportunity now that sadly the international community is wasting. We haven't mentioned the war for Tripoli so far, and that was a new kind of military conflict. The way in which drones and counter anti-aircraft capabilities were decisively deployed by Turkey in that war is sure to be studied and likely imitated in other theaters. And this is something that Wolfgang and I have written about extensively, and we have a launch of our paper at MEI later today. Nonetheless, the Turks' successful defense of Tripoli never meant that they could conquer eastern Libya, and it didn't decrease the LNA's support in its heartland. Therefore, a kind of mutually hurting stalemate has been in effect for around 5 months now, and this has actually provided the conditions for a political dialogue. So now is the time for the international community to say, there is a mutually hurting stalemate militarily. We're going to make a mutually hurting stalemate institutionally and economically, and deal with the oft-neglected and dysfunctional economic system. Sadly, however, the focus has been on the same BS power sharing or military attempt at DDR to create a unified military. And this doesn't deal with the real issues in Libya, which are that the dysfunctional economy makes it benefit to be in a militia. So until you reform the economy, you can't have a positive outcome that would remold the conflict dynamics. So where does all this leave Libya? And can the UN, the EU, and the US help Libyan reformers address the underlying causes of the war? That now we actually have a mutilating stalemate taking hold. As we speak, the Pause Tunis Dialogue Conference is going on. And it's highly likely, given the bribery allegations that seem to be quite real, that a loss of momentum will result. And no compromise list of executive officials for a fourth transitional phase will emerge, or as Mohammed Douri calls it, a fifth transitional phase. We can disagree on the nomenclature. So once the UN process stalls, and alternative actors will attempt to dominate the Libya file, and where does this leave us? Another interregnum in the wars for the post-Gaddafi succession. So I think what we need to use meetings like this is to discuss what are the practical steps that can deal with the underlying causes of letters of credit fraud, subsidies on petrol, subsidies on electricity, that essentially make it beneficial for the status quo party to keep on staying in power. And I hope that working together with different viewpoints, that can, yield those kind of breakthroughs. But the 75, as we heard from Zahra, we don't know if they're a legislative body, an executive body, or an economic reform body. So this proliferation of tracks, for me, is not okay. I don't believe in multi-trackism. There's got to be one track dealing with the core economic issues, or, it's bound to backfire.
Thank you, Jason. Edward, do you want to jump into this and give your comment about everything that we've heard today?
Hani, thank you very much, and great to be here with all these highly esteemed and respected experts. And I tell you, Hani, as someone who's trying to process all of this and approach this from some type of useful conflict management framework, I'm a little confused, I have to admit. And maybe if I could begin with a question, I'll go backwards and start with Jason, if I could. And all of these speakers have been helpful in trying and in illuminating this, but I still have some questions here. Jason, if I could start with you. I think Zara gave a very good framework of dividing this in between the what and the how. And if we could, perhaps for the benefit of our viewers who don't have their grasp on all of these details, if you, Jason, or anyone can explain what is the concept that Stephanie Williams, who apparently, as I understand, has this support of the international community, and I understand, Jason, that they're neglecting the economic part. I understand that. But if we could just begin, what is the concept that is being put forward? There has to be some power sharing. There has to be some modus of agreeing on even the most basic interim power in order to tackle these difficult questions that are the conflict drivers, like the economy. So what is Stephanie Williams' concept that apparently has this backing? What is the power sharing? What is the roadmap to elections? And any other related question? If Jason, you could address that, or Zahra, or Mohammed, or either of our Mohammed Foreign Minister, that would be great.
I'd like to jump in first. Thank you for that question, Edward. Her concept is roughly the same as Khirat, which is that the previous transitional phases have failed. We're beyond the time frame that the 3 August 2011 temporary constitutional declaration was initially built for. And hence, we need to eliminate the multiplicity of bodies, such as the HOR in the East, the GNA and Higher State Council in the West, and have a new form of legitimacy. The idea is that this new form of legitimacy can come through something like a national conference, whereby representative delegates who are, in theory, representing different political currents or different geographical areas legitimately decide to appoint an interim executive body to move towards presidential and parliamentary elections, albeit ignoring the constitutional track. That is a conflict management theory. And in a way, it draws on a certain understanding of what happened between 1949 and 1951. I don't believe it suits where we're at now, but I get the idea of trying to bridge together all these competing institutions and personalities, and then emerge with a new presidential council, which will be an executive authority of 3 people, somehow geographically or political currents representative, which will oversee a transition to elections. The reason that that's been chosen is that's something which is palatable in Western capitals and is explicable to a mass audience. Oh, we're moving towards elections. But
right.
It doesn't
So I think this is a very good analysis of what perhaps is occurring or what has been advised to Stephanie, because there's no question that if you just step back a little bit, as all the effort that has been made in the last 2 years by the United Nations office in Libya, whereby there were repetitive consultations going around identifying points of agreements and disagreements. There's also a sort of an incognito body that the United Nations relies on to make recommendations, so that when we are basically looking at a recommendation is made that you bring in 75 people, not 70 people, not 60 people, not 100 people, 75 people. And this is the composition that it is. It's going to be 13 from the parliament, 13 from the state and body, and then you bring them all together in there. Now, the geniuses that are getting together and basically coming out with those recommendations, the geniuses who are coming out with papers that have been circulated around at the meeting when the 75 are assembled together to discuss different topics, such as, for example, how do you choose? What is the methodology that you're going to be choosing to basically pick up who is going to be the next head of the state? In other words, the presidential council, and how you're going to be choosing them, how are you going to be choosing the prime minister? There is an entity that is working behind the scene that is Libya expert team, you may call it, by the United Nations, or others that are based in Geneva and so on, and they come up with those things and so on. Now, that really deserves a little bit of if we're seeing the same mistakes happening again and again and again, it brings the questions a little bit deeper, not just to the face of Stephanie Williams, but also to those who are behind the scene that are making those recommendations and forwarding them to him. If they're bringing in the same repetitive mistake again and again and again, are they worthy of calling themselves Libya experts? And is the United Nations process vis-a-vis Libya at fault here? And what can be done to be different so that the advice that is forwarded is going to be a little bit better and different than what we are seeing today? So, Muhammad Ijara, I want you and Zahra to address exactly this question. How are the ideas formulated and surfacing to the extent that you are dealing with those documents and have to respond to it? Where are we going there?
I think you might have misunderstood what I was getting at, though.
No, Jason, it's a little bit on the side of all this, but Muhammad and Zahra, I'd like to really hear from you.
Yes, can I jump in now, Dr. Hani?
Please do.
I beg to disagree with Jason. I don't think this is another Skhirat. I don't see it as another Skhirat at all. And that's not to say that it is better. It could be even worse. I think the framework here is a bit different. It's power sharing, but it's power sharing based on a Ta'if-like structure or framework.
So you mentioned the Ta'if. Yeah, you have
yes.
to the
yes, the agreement, the Ta'if agreement in Lebanon, the power sharing agreement in Lebanon. And I think, and this needs to be clarified. I think there were many international organizations back in 2014 and 15 when we were having this Khairat agreement, critical of the process that was mediated by Bernardino Leon. And they actually, back then, they proposed that Libya needs a Ta'if agreement like. And these people, these organizations are on board now. So I think we cannot read what happened. Last week exercise was only part of the picture. And it's more like Khairat, but it's more, there's more into the picture than the documents that came out. So I think one has to read the whole project and the proposal that was made last year and the 2 years before by Ghassan Salama, which failed, which was supposed to be culminated in Ghadames on the 10th of April. And he had the idea of that Libya needs a social contract. A national charter, not only unifying the executive body and the HOR and to move to elections. So it's completely different. But when that failed, and we had almost a proxy war, we had the Berlin process. And so, and that's why it was important. And actually, Ghassan always keeps on reminding us that it was a rare opportunity that we need to invest in. And that's why maybe the messages today, one can take that, okay, this is, it's not that it's tokenistic and they're saying we believe in the political process. We will see whether they will really commit and support the process or not. But what happened in the Berlin process? We had a document, and I urge you all to look into it. It talked that Libya needs a comprehensive approach, not only a political solution, and that's why we had the multi-trackism, the economic track, which addresses the issues that I've raised, and maybe Jason raised the underlying issues of rentierism, other issues. But the link, I always say that there is no coherent vision of all the tracks. Ghassan Salama used to, because he's the engineer of this process, and Stephanie is continuing the process that Ghassan started. So there is this, and the important part that I want to say is in this document, the Berlin process, there is the talk for the very first time about the 3 regions, ثلاث أقاليم, Cyrenaica, Tripoli, and Fazan. So there is this carrot that it's not decentralization or a full-fledged decentralization or federalism, but there is this talking about the regions. And this was one of the major issues that was really critical inside the whole when at the table of negotiations. And never, ever forget the Montreux track, which was also alluded to in a Security Council resolution. So in our meeting last week, yes, it's power sharing, but we were building on LPA, we're opening it up, reinterpreting it, bridging the gaps. That was the aim, regardless of we failed or not, but this is the framework. And we're building on the Berlin process, where it mentions for the very first time these 3 regions. And then we have the Montreux. The Montreux was actually hosted by HD. There was this Lausanne process, but it failed. So UN distanced itself from it. So that's why when I say multi-trackism, I do believe in multi-trackism, but what I see is rather ad hoc multi-trackism, and it's not clear. So what I want to stress is this one point. The issue, the carrot of the regions, without having a constitutional framework, because the elephant in the room is the constitution. And this is always not addressed on the table. We need to end the transitional period. And we have, I do believe in the urgency to reactivate the Constitution of Independence in 1951, rather than talk about regions without a constitutional framework. And this is what is happening at the moment. So I don't think it's only about Skhirat. It's more than that. And that will be clarified to many of us later on.
All right. And I have to refer to the point that the HD did describe what is happening in Libya as making sausages at one point. Am I correct on that one? Mohammed, please jump into this.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, let me answer your question directly and as succinctly as possible. There is a huge problem with UNSMIL in terms, number one, of mandate, and number two, in terms of capacity, human resources capacity. And it is because of that UNSMIL is actually outsourcing some of the tasks that it is supposed to be performing itself within UNSMIL. We bring the issue of HD Center. I have asked the question both in private meetings, but also now publicly. I asked the question, what is the contractual agreement between HD Center and UNSMIL? What are the two doing? What's the TOR of HD Center in the Libyan political process? To me, it's unprecedented. Now, I also raised the question about the Montreux meeting and the Lausanne meeting. I asked the question of how did you decide to invite these particular individuals to these meetings? Why was it these particular individuals to these meetings? I did not get a convincing answer when I raised the question about particular participants, and I said that there is an active investigation against at least one of the participants in those meetings in Scotland in particular, according to the authorities there. The answer was, we are not judges. Of course, you are not a judge, but you have the power to invite people. And you decided to use that power to invite those people to your meetings. I asked another question to HD Center. As a Libyan, do I have the right to access the information from those exclusive private meetings to know exactly what it is that has been agreed or discussed or disagreed upon? And the answer was no. I do not actually, as a Libyan, have right to access these information. Now, the interesting part is that the episode of the bribes and the issue of allegations that people are paying money, it all involved individuals that have been at these or one of these two meetings that have been organized by HD Center. So to me, as an observer, but most importantly, as a Libyan, this raises really huge questions. And because of the lack of transparency, both from UNSMIL and HD Center, this feeds all of those conspiracy theories, and it feeds all of this disinformation or etc. But there are, let me be clear, there are very legitimate questions and concerns that have to be addressed by UNSMIL and by any institution that UNSMIL outsources its tasks to.
I think you bring in a very important point, which is it is about time that the transparency issue be reversed in a way whereby those individuals that are sitting at the HD Center and the Libya Expert Group, the United Nations, and so on, are actually questioned about how they are conducting their business vis-a-vis Libya. And you know, the interesting thing about it is that those questions are surfacing from the Libyan diaspora a lot more than from the inside of Libya, because the Libyans just simply don't know. But because of your development and so on, you are penetrating enough to actually bring those questions up. There has to be very clear explanation of why are we in this particular quagmire and what are they doing? What is their quality of performance? There's so many questions that are coming up right now, and they need to be accountable for what they are doing in Libya as well. That does not say that the Libyans are not at fault, that Libya is not a challenging thing, but it's time to actually ask those questions. What are they doing? What are they thinking? Who are they? And how do they bring such processes that keep on failing again and again and again and raising more and more questions? Now, Jason, you know, I want you to get back to your point also on Stephanie and the performance, and what do you mean by all of it? Please go ahead. Unmute, please. Unmute.
Thank you so much, Hani. I was afraid that I was being a little too flippant earlier, in that I'm not trying to say we should have a conspiracy theory against either UNSMIL or HD Center. They've failed, and they are trying to push the boulder up the hill that rolled down again exactly the same way, and it's going to roll down again. But that's only because they have no mandate to do anything else. Mohammed has pointed out that we're dealing with about 30 people that barely have any budget to inform themselves, and they don't have the intelligence services of the US or UK governments. And then they're being actively opposed by members of the Security Council, who I won't name. And then they're being undermined by certain NATO allies who want the whole process to fail. So Stephanie is a valiant soldier trying to solve the conflict with a methodology that she didn't choose, that she can't change, and that she doesn't have the resources to implement. So I don't like when people go blaming individuals who probably have slept 4 hours per week and are paid a very small amount, but are trying to help Libya. The point here is that the international community doesn't exist as a thing. When we use the term international community, we're dreaming up of some mythical, early post-Cold War, mid-1990s, that there's some America and everyone agrees that we can work with these international institutions, and Bill Clinton is going to lead the way forward and save us from Serbian nationalism. We don't live in that world anymore. There's Brexit, there's Donald Trump contesting the election, and for years and years, there's been the fissure between Russia and Turkey, the UAE and Qatar, Italy and France within the EU. So there is no international community, and there's no unified UN process about anything. So it's under that framework that there is no coherent approach, and multi-trackism and all these intellectual ideas about, what if we had a national conference and we reset in this way and that way? It can't work because it doesn't have one Pied Piper to whom everyone else marches. And that multiplicity is what causes these screw-ups.
Yeah, well, one has to recognize that, Stephanie Williams is definitely one of the most energetic human beings that one could ever deal with and face in the world. Her efforts and her passion about the Libyan subject is unprecedented. But it is certainly the environment around it from every aspect, whether it is the international support, whether it is the entities that work for the United Nations and so on behind the scene, whether it is the support that she has locally and in the country and around. There's so much to be said about it. There's so much to be said also about the middle management as well. There has been a lot of criticism of the soldiers around Stephanie Williams vis-a-vis their performance in the cities and in the environment of Libya, interacting with Libyans and so on. So it's a very, very complex matter. But, after 8 years of being in Libya with this way, the United Nations really needs to reassess their performance and how the money is being spent, the track that they are taking, and so on. Now, I know that Mohammed had some experience, Mohammed Al-Dairi. Do you want to make any opinion in this regards, Mohammed? You've had to deal with the United Nations in the past.
Thank you, Dr. Hani. I would like to just to fall back on what you expressed earlier yourself and at the beginning, Zahra, the frustration that we have all Libyans about the international community. And I fully subscribe to what Jason had just said, that there is no international community, but there is a leader. So spot the leader. Mr. Ghassan Salami last year tried to spot a leader, and he went to Mrs. Merkel, and he requested her to intervene and to lead the process. She has come forward, and we have had the Berlin process. However, COVID-19 with other domestic issues in Germany, we have seen the US prevailing on on the Libyan issue, especially last summer, not least because of the increased Russian presence, military presence in Libya. So I fully agree with Jason and others who are casting some doubt about the future. We have to draw a parallel between now and what happened in 2015. Stephanie Williams, for family reasons, will leave next month, and we will have a new special envoy who has not negotiating anything, but he has to perhaps implement an agreement that has been spearheaded and negotiated by others. Undoubtedly, he will have his learning curve in the unfortunately muddy Libya and the complex issues that we all grappling with in Libya. So additionally, we have the US, which has other priorities after the 20th of January. We have COVID-19, we have China, we have maybe in the Middle East, Iran, and indeed, the US would not be able to, Libya will be on the back burner, will be put on the back burner by the US, unfortunately. So I think the UNSMIL and the new head would need a great support. And with due respect to the 4 European nations, I don't think that they can leverage Russia or even for that matter Turkey, not least because of what has happened today and what happened recently to the French Navy working within the Irene process. So indeed, even if we were to get an executive body clinched by Stephanie Williams and her team between now and next month, it remains to be seen whether we will have an environment, a military, a security environment, domestically and internationally. I think we have heard about the yes from you, Mr. Kudzai.
Thank you,
we heard
Mohammed.
about the duality between Turkey and Russia and the plans that may come forward between them when it comes to the military issues in Libya.
Thank you, Mohammed. And I just want to go back to the political process and the Tunisia meeting. But before we do this, and since we are basically looking at the performance of the United Nations in Libya and so on, we are at the cusp of having a new representative in there, and the name of a very capable Bulgarian diplomat has been proposed as the next representative. And I have to say that having been involved in Libyan politics since 2003, when I was asked to look at the file of the conflict between Libya and Bulgaria as a result of the HIV catastrophe spread in a Benghazi hospital where 168 children were assumed to be victimized by the Bulgarian nurses who are absolutely innocent. And then the whole internationalization of this whole issue, there's no question that the Bulgarians were innocent and they were brought into the chaotic world of Gaddafi, whereby he accused them inappropriately of being or trying to inject the kids. Now, Libyans are very simple-minded when it comes to those issues. And out of the 168 children, many of them have grown, a lot have died, but some of them have grown. And every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we hear about a Libyan 26, 27-year-old who just passed away as a result of complications of HIV. And the reaction from the streets of Libya towards this is that they still, inside them, believe that the Bulgarians were responsible for this, even though they're absolutely innocent. So then jumping back into the choice of the next representative in Libya, and having a Bulgarian citizen, notwithstand his capability, his authority, his skill, to have him come in and be a mediator in Libya at a time where the Libyans still believe, or a big chunk of them still believe, that the Bulgarians are responsible for the death of their kids, lacks a little bit of sensitivity, and also tells me that the Secretary of the United Nations and the team that is there are not thinking deep enough about the plight of the country and the people in there. So again, I just thought I'd throw this in that there is something incomplete about how the United Nations is working in Libya today. So having said this, I would like to get back to the Tunis process, and I'll give you the name, but I want to go back to Zahra again, because Zahra is an active participant. I've heard today through your website or to your Facebook thing that you had withdrawn from the discussions today. Do you want to tell us about your reasons for this, and how did you come to this point of saying that you're withdrawing?
Actually, I said I abstained from this meeting. As you all may know, there was a statement that was signed by 65 members of the 75 members of the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum a couple of days ago, based on what already Stephanie Williams has announced in a press conference, that there are serious allegations and that there is an investigation, and that there might be international sanctions for those who are proven to be those who are indicted. So yesterday there was a statement and an open letter by Libyan civil society organizations to the General Secretary of the UN, to Stephanie Williams, and to the Attorney General, to open an investigation for the UN and UNSMIL to basically deal with the investigation as a serious matter and in a transparent fashion. So we know, I was told that we all were told, and I think it was in public as well, that the panel of experts of the Security Council have started their investigation. However, the statement that we've had 65 out of the 75 signed on, there were certain demands, and of the two demands, that whoever is under investigation, their membership should be suspended until further notice, and that whoever is...
Before you go through this, can you just tell us what the accusations that were made, and a little bit more specific?
There is, it's political money, it's bribery, and it has already been mentioned.
Bribery for what? Bribery to...
buying votes, buying votes.
Buying votes for the candidates for the Presidential Council and candidates for the Prime Minister.
I will not specify, yes, for the executive body. So without specifying, without going into names.
And these attempts were made during the
yes, and so it involved some of the members, and actually it was officially reported. And here I stress officially reported, because what I've heard today, that it was said that it was not officially reported. I don't know what they mean by it was not officially reported, but we know that Stephanie Williams was on a press conference saying that there were serious allegations. They are investigating in it, and there might be international sanctions applied. This was her words in a press conference. In a statement, a public statement by the members of the LPDF, we stressed that we need to take, that the UNSMIL should take clear transparent, clear measures to ensure transparency and accountability. And especially that we only have like a month before the end of year holidays, and there will be other some meetings going on voting on the mechanism of selection or voting. We need to clarify and clear the process first. And so since we were not updated before the meeting, I personally chose to abstain from attending today's meeting, because I think that we deserve to hear back from UNSMIL, and Libyan public deserve to basically establish the whole concept of transparency and even national ownership. There were some of us, especially who are background of human rights, our thing was here is all about the process, to make sure that the process is not rigged.
Were there any others that have
abstaining from today? I'm not aware of. However, as I said, there are 65 members, including those involved, have signed this. So I think this should be taken seriously, especially that we, as you all said, that this body will play a role in leading Libya's preparatory phase, and is supposed to end the status quo factions that are playing a major role in corruption. So this body should not be corrupt itself. So that's why the process is important, to maintain and to ensure that there is accountability, there is transparency. Any other problems and challenges, I'm willing, Yani, to understand, accommodate, but I think this is a serious issue that needs to be addressed. There were other issues related to physical threats. There are major issues. Okay, so I think we need to have terms of reference, and this was one of the things that we have actually, when Ghassan Salama was in Geneva, one of the things that we said that before going into negotiating anything, that we need to have a mandate, clear mandate, terms of reference, to organize all these issues. This would be establishing an ad hoc organization institution will reinforce the state of institutional anarchy in the country.
It seems like
could I jump in with a question?
I will give you the floor in a second.
Thanks.
You know, I have to say that we have attempted to reach out to Stephanie Williams, and I know she's extremely busy, but you know, there is a silence and there is a lack of response from there, which actually raises even the level of, you know, concern a little bit more, and that, you know, Libyans really do need to hear about what is going on in there, and the absence of the responses and so on are absolutely concerning. I mean, certainly first, you know, not only as Libyans, but as Libyan Americans, and as Americans, we need to know what is exactly the process and what are the limitations, and how the United Nations will respond to all those things.
Dr. Hani, if I can just say here, I have to say that the communication strategy of UNSMIL under Stephanie is much better, and she is reaching out. However, this is a major challenge, and she needs to address it with all boldness, and to step forward and talk about it to Libyan people, and to have a statement on it. That's what I'm calling for.
I'm going to ask Edward to have a word here. Please go ahead, Edward.
Thank you, Dr. Shanib, Chairman. I appreciate that. And thanks for the previous effort there, Jason and others, to try to clarify exactly what this concept is, what this executive council is, what powers it has, who is supposed to run it. I really appreciate that. I think our viewers will appreciate that. I have one specific question before we come to the end that I think is quite important, and that is, if any of our esteemed panelists can explain to the viewers what role the United States is playing in this process as precisely as you can. Is the U.S. ambassador to Libya involved? If so, he's supportive of what Stephanie Williams is doing. If so, to what capacity? Is he going to other states? Is he speaking to some of these leaders? Or is it just sort of a nominal, well, rhetorical, well, we support this process? Or is it an engagement? Is there an active presence there by the U.S.? Thank you.
It's a very important question. I doubt that this is the forum for this, even though the role of the United States should actually escalate as things are just getting out of hand in that region. We do know that the U.S. ambassador is extremely engaged, and we follow his steps as he moves from one capital to the other and nudging players in a very significant way. But I don't want to deviate from the Tunis things a little bit. Mohammed Jarrah, can you please tell us, just in 1 minute, your opinion of all this in a nutshell, the corruption matter and so on, and where this is leading ultimately?
Yeah. So on the corruption and the bribery matter, there are two considerations to take into account. This is a question or an issue of corruption in UN-led peace process. So this is a big issue here. So it is about corruption that happens inside of a UN-led peace process in Libya. That is number one. Number two, this comes on the back of the 23rd of August protests across the nation, in Benghazi, in Misrata, in Tripoli, and so on. And these were anti-corruption protests, and they were also in relation to deterioration in services and so on. And this tells you how serious this matter is in reality. What I am concerned and worried about is that this matter will be brushed under the rug for whatever reason. It could be because of capacity questions and not being able to deal with it. Already, some people are raising legal questions about how do we go about this? Is this for Tunisian authorities? Is this for the Libyan general prosecutor? Is this an international law issue? But the reality is that testimonies have been provided to UNSMIL and to Stephanie about a number of issues that will taint, that will put a big question mark on the outcomes of this peace, if this UN-led peace process in Libya. The outcomes of the Libyan Political Dialogue Forum are in question unless the issue of corruption, political money, be it because of the candidates to the prime minister or the executive, or be it because of participants within, is a serious matter, and it has to be addressed transparently, and we must know about it. It's a right. It's a basic right for all of Libyans.
Well said. Wolfgang, do you want to make a comment? You've been really silent for the last hour.
Yes, but it was quite interesting to listen. Let me stress that from my point, UN is repeating some key mistakes, not all of them, but some key mistakes from Skhirat. Especially the legitimacy of the LPTF is questionable. And this will be a problem for the foreseeable future. The non-transparent selection of the participants by UNSMIL, by Stephanie Williams, does not give them any kind of legitimacy. I even want to ask, is UNSMIL entitled to give legitimacy or a mandate, as mentioned by Zahra, for something? I doubt it. More or less, they are discussing a UN proposal, a UN prepared paper to be implemented. And this brings me to the second major problem. I think as long as they are pursuing, as in Skhirat, a centralized top-down approach, it will not work.
Yes.
I think it's simply not realistic to have a centralized government sitting in Tripoli or in Sirte being in charge of the whole country. A decentral bottom-up approach is required. Legitimacy could be provided either by the HOR and the Supreme State Council, or why not by the elected municipal representatives. Let's keep in mind, we had successful local elections almost all over Libya. Those who were elected there could come together and discuss and decide about the future of Libya. They would have legitimacy. And my last word, frequently it is stressed that there are historic successes if this the other piece is agreed. But I think stressing always historic successes where there are none is not very helpful.
So you're suggesting that you need more than a simple band-aid solution in there, and there needs to be a fundamentals or a look at the fundamentals of the problem, decipher it in a way where you can build solidly on it.
Exactly.
Jason. Yeah,
exactly.
Jason, please go ahead. Jason.
Thank you, Hani. We heard two very cogent points from Mohammed and Wolfgang. To build on Mohammed's point, corruption and the UN's role in Libya have always been intertwined. People don't talk about it, but even before the Skirat conference happened, Bernardino Leon was taking money from the United Arab Emirates, and the process was fundamentally compromised at that moment. The allegations that are circulating right now are likely real, but they are not of UN officials being bribed. And I just want to make a difference between what happened with Leon and what's happening now. The allegations now are of Libyan participants being bribed by the agents of other Libyan entities for their votes in the executive body. And this is more like how a pope used to be selected in the Middle Ages. He who had the most funds knew his supporters, and he bribed those on the fence to win. So that process works for two reasons in this case. It works if it's not detected and your candidate gets the votes, but it also works if it is detected, because all they want to do is undermine the process because they're status quo beneficiaries. So long as there's no legitimacy and the whole thing fails, well, there's still a black market rate of the dinar and there's still letters of credit fraud going on. So I'm not going to name names in this call.
Yeah,
but
Jason, this is a very important thing because the whole emphasis has been to try and find a temporary measure to move forward with a country that is just a total disaster. And the idea of getting an executive body that can just survive the country until the elections is really of reasonable merit. And yet the benefactor of all this today, because of the power struggle that exists, the attempts to fail the political agreement and so on, is that you're going to be endorsing a status quo ante which exists and is really very unhealthy for the country. Probably it just means that Siraj is going to continue for another year and a half, leading the country to nowhere with all the power struggles that we see today between NOC and the central bank and the foreign bank and so on and so on. How do you break all this stalemate? Well, anybody wants to take a crack at it, because this is, at the end of the day, the most important question. How do you break through this?
Let me just jump in here, Hani, very quickly, and I'll let Jason have the last word. Hani, this is precisely why I raised the question of the U.S., because this is an issue where the U.S. should be speaking. These are terrible allegations of corruption. The U.S. is an important voice here and should be speaking about the integrity of the process. And that's why I was asking, what actually is the role? How involved or not? But I stopped there. Jason is infinitely more informed about Libya than I am, so please.
No, I think you bring in a very important role, particularly for the National Council on U.S.-Libya relations, that is really wanting to shed some light on what is happening in there, and also ask our responsible representatives, where do you want to take this? You know, the United States is a major funder for the United Nations. It has a very influential role on Security Council and on all other measures. Something like this, particularly the allegations that are surfacing from Tunisia and so on, are very serious and can make or break the confidentiality and the trust that people have on the political process. Where are they on this? What is the role of the United States in there? We have a great ambassador. We have strong presence in Libya. U.S. aid really is a major funder for stabilization of the country. There must be a sort of a little bit more influence on what is happening on the ground from the United States. And that is a very good question that you raised, Edward, on this whole thing. Any final comments?
Yes, so I don't know if the irony was lost on the viewers, but it wasn't lost on me. Obviously, the US is in no position right now to be commenting on the integrity of an election or how to deal without bribery. So we're going to have to wait until the Biden administration comes in with a lot more credibility to play our more traditional role of trying to unite the allies. It's going to be tough because we're never going to go back to a unipolar world. But on the question of where to go from here that Edward and Hani have posed, I think that you can talk too much about the past. If Israelis and Palestinians debate whose grandfather kicked out the other person and who has the right to this land, you're never going to get anywhere. The past is very screwed up and complex, and academics can discuss it. We need to put that behind us and think about what Libyans have in common. And that's that they want their people to have better lives for their grandchildren than their grandparents had. And they want to be educated, and they want to have better health care, and they want to have less corruption. So I think that the Libyan people are fairly united on what they want in the future, even if they disagree about whose fault it is to get to this place. And
this goes to the point, and this goes to the point that Zahra brought in that really the solutions for Libya are from the bottom up, and these are very fundamental, really basics for how you build the country again. Zahra, I want to thank you for everything that you contributed today. Please go ahead and say you have the final word for it. You are an essential part of this conversation.
The role of the U.S. I think from what I've seen, the role of the U.S. in backing this acting special envoy this time is greater than I've seen in other before. We all remember Dr. Tariq Mitri, the former special envoy, used to say that the U.S. is not interested enough in Libya. I see that the U.S. is interested, but however, very interested and is backing Stephanie. However, we need to make sure that we don't have half-cooked solutions. There should be no quick fixes. There should be no solutions rushed for next month. I think we need to safeguard the transparency and the accountability of the process. The process is important more than the goal. And I think that we need to have a national charter. At the core of it, there should be distributive justice, and to address the elephant in the room, which is the Constitution. I think there should be a role for the U.S. in pushing these agendas.
Well, thank you so much, Zahra. I think we're running out of time, and I know Muhammad wanted to also emphasize the role of the United States and how it really has been playing a very important role in the last year at least. I want to thank you all for being part of this panel, and we've learned a lot today. We wish all the best to the Office of United Nations Support and Stephanie Williams in her endeavor. It is not an easy task. It is quite challenging. The players that are there are not easy players either. There's a lot of fraction, there's a lot of differences, and there's a lot of misunderstanding. And Libya has to go through it. It has to survive this process. We can only measure the outcome of the political process by the ultimate success that we hope that will happen. And we just think that there should be some regulatory measures that need to be tied up and improved upon. And all the best for everybody around. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you for being part of this panel. All right, guys, have a good day. Thank you. Yazid, we can close now.